Hello, friends, and welcome to the Cultivate podcast, a podcast of the Evergreen Association. I realize that I'm not your normal person that you see welcoming you for something like this. My name is Paul Schneider, and I am the Associate Executive Minister of Operations and Administration for Evergreen. And with me today is Reverend Dr. Liliana DaValle, who is, among other things, our budget officer. And we're going to be talking today about a theology of giving, about how giving to Evergreen helps all of our churches, and then how giving to United Missions helps our denomination, our region, and our churches all together. So thank you so much for being here, Liliana, and welcome back to the Cultivate podcast. I am so glad you could join us today.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me. And it's great to do this in person with you. And hello to all the people who are watching this podcast. Welcome, and thank you for being with us.
So you've had a pretty significant career in the ABC at many different levels. One of the things that I really appreciate about when we're talking together is that experience that you have as a local church pastor, as an area minister, working in the denomination at various levels, and now as Evergreen's budget officer. One thing I always find that you articulate well is a theology of giving. Could you share a little bit about that? What is a theology of giving, and why is it important?
I think a theology of giving is what you have in the back of your mind that moves you to give, inspires you to share some of your resources in the work of the Lord, basically. I consider giving a spiritual discipline. I think it's a very spiritual activity. Funny that nowadays most people give online, and it sounds strange that sitting in front of your computer and punching the keyboard is a spiritual activity. But I think it is when in your heart you determine to share what you have for the betterment of your church, your region, your denomination in the world. So that's my theology of giving, is that giving is sacrificial. You always make a sacrifice when you share, because you have what you need and then you share from that. But it's pretty much like we learn in kindergarten to share. You want to keep the toys to yourself, but if you share them, you learn about social skills, you learn about being the kind of person you need to be in the world. And this is pretty similar to that.
When it comes to giving, most people are used to giving to their church. That's something that a lot of people do in whatever way that they can, whether that's they give on a regular basis or they just give when they can afford to do so, that kind of thing. What about a discipline of giving as a church to the denomination and to the region?
I think that's very important. In my culture, in my background, I learned about tithing. When I came to the United States, I realized that tithing means different things for different people. For me, it meant originally when I learned, it was 10% of what you have, you give for the work of the Lord. Then I learned that for some people, giving is just a percentage, maybe 10%, maybe 3%, but it's giving regularly for the work of the Lord. So I believe that as you as an individual give that in that way to your church, the church should give in that way to the regional and denominational work, because none of us is supposed, in the economy of God, none of us is supposed to keep 100% of what we get. We are taught by God to share, like I said before. And churches should share the same way individuals share with the church.
What, in your opinion, is the best way for a church to do that?
Well, in our denomination, we have a couple of channels. The predominant one is United Missions. we give to United Missions. It's called United Missions because that money that we give is then distributed to different channels of mission through the denomination. International ministries, national ministries, regional ministries, so it goes that way. Another way that churches may have to give is to have what we call a regional offering, for example. Some special gifts that the church designates for the region they work with, in this case, Evergreen, of course.
So with United Mission giving, you had mentioned the idea of tithing. Is there a recommended amount that churches give to United Mission?
Well, yes. United Missions itself, the denomination, recommends to give 10% of our budgets, the budget of the church, 10% of the budget of the church for United Missions. For some churches, this seems an unsurmountable amount of money and impossible. So my recommendation for those churches is to start with what they can afford now. Part of my theology of giving is that God blesses you when you give. And as churches start being faithful in giving what they can, they will can more in due time, because there is blessing in the giving. This is not only biblical, but also based on experience, my own personal experience. So I talk about this with a great high sense of certainty.
Sure.
Yeah.
When it comes to the United Mission giving, you mentioned that it goes to a bunch of different places.
Yes.
How much of that stays with the region versus how much gets passed on to those other organizations in the denomination?
This is great information because churches need to know this to be encouraged to give. 65% of what churches give for United Missions come back to the region for regional ministry. What that means is that we're not sending money to some people we don't know to pay for overhead, to pay for administrative costs in the East Coast, but we are really sustaining ministry locally in our region. Ministry that supports churches that are in bad financial situations, ministries that support programs of renewal, programs of blessing to the local church. The home ministry of the region that includes conflict mediation, includes envisioning for the future, includes all these things that people like you do in our midst, are supported in part by this United Mission. This is a huge part of our budget as a region, the money that comes, the income that we receive from the United Mission giving.
With all those things that Evergreen is doing, including things like our leadership retreat and our annual meeting and those local supports that churches get that you mentioned, that 65% is a really significant part of our budget, you said. Do you know about how much?
Yes, it's about 22% of our budget, of the budgeted income for the region. About 22% comes from this bucket. Okay. From United Missions.
And then what does that other 35% go to?
It goes to the denomination in different places. It supports some of the ministries of international ministries, the work with missionaries that we love so much. It supports the work with Native Americans across the country. It supports institutions like seminaries and the Green Lake Conference Center. So a lot of the work that is done that we cannot do by ourselves, but is done together, is supported by this 35% of what we give.
When it comes to the way that churches give, is there, you had mentioned that churches could give specially designated as a region offering. Do we have a requirement or do we have a suggested amount for churches to give for that?
Okay, Evergreen doesn't charge a fee to member churches to be a part of Evergreen and doesn't have a required amount. at all. Individuals can give through their churches to Evergreen as an individual offering, and we have plenty of individuals who do that. Churches can give, as I mentioned in the beginning, a regional offering to the region, to Evergreen, but we don't have a requirement amount. We are Baptists, and as Baptists, we are people of freedom. Right. We have the freedom to give, and we have the freedom to give whatever we can or want to give. No requirements are here.
When it comes to individual giving, some people do give directly to Evergreen. And that is something that we factor into our budget and our income as well. How much of our budget is based on that individual giving, people giving faithfully on a monthly, yearly, or quarterly basis?
We have about close to 6% of our budget is based on individual giving. By the way, individuals can give through their churches. I mentioned this before. And the way they do that is as a designated offering for Evergreen. And then the church sends that money to Evergreen. Or the individual can send the money to Evergreen directly. Whichever way, like I said, we are free to do it in whatever way we want.
Another thing that I think is really important, and with the biennial coming up I'm very aware of, is that when we give to United Mission, that's actually something the denomination pays to, and the number of delegates a church gets is based on both its size and the amount that it gives to United Mission. So even if you're only giving a little bit, giving anything to United Mission allows your church to have more of a voice in the way that our denomination works. That's not quite how it works in Evergreen, since we operate on consensus. So your voice is not mediated by how much you give to Evergreen. But I think that's important for churches to know that that is one of the benefits of United Mission giving.
That's correct. And I'll mention another benefit. From time to time, a church may need a loan from the American Baptist Extension Corporation, or may apply for a grant that is given through different channels in our denomination. Those donors or lenders will look at how faithful, not how much, but how faithful the church has been in giving to United Missions. Is your church a United Missions giver? And that plays a very important role in their decision to give you a grant or a loan. So it's really in our benefit. I remember a church that I know that applied twice for a grant. It was not a United Missions giver and was rejected, not solely on those bases, but didn't get the grant. And as a result of that, decided to start giving to United Missions. A portion, of their budget went to United Missions since that time. And that's a good thing to understand.
One of the things that we believe in Evergreen is transparency. And so that's where something like knowing that about United Missions, I think, is really important. We want to make sure that our churches have the opportunity to take advantage of all of the things that are out there for them and get to participate fully in the life of the denomination and the region.
Yeah, let me mention another principle that we have. We have transparency in the way we receive the money and the way we process the money that comes from our churches. But we also have another principle is responsibility in our spending. We are very careful. And as a budget review officer, I always pay attention to the way we're spending money. We want to be responsible. We want to be sustainable. Right. And we practice those concepts in our association.
So the way Evergreen is organized, we have an executive committee that makes our month-to-month, sort of day-to-day decisions that the staff then enacts. One of the things that the executive committee did that I thought was really important recently was they took a look at our endowments and they said, we want to make sure that we're not dipping into the capital, the core of our endowments, but rather that continues to grow. That is a way to make sure that we are sustainable. And they capped the amount of money that we should pull from our endowments to be at 90% of the growth year over year. And that was, I felt like, a very fiscally responsible decision that's going to have long-term impacts. However, we'd also be not being honest or transparent if we didn't acknowledge that right now the market has had a lot of volatility. What are the impacts of that, long-term and short-term, for Evergreen?
Short term, we have felt the need to protect the money that was faithfully given through the years by members of Evergreen, and we have relocated some of those resources into safer investments that may not give a good return or such a hefty return, but are safer, such as CDs, for example. Right. In the long term, that's a big question mark, Paul. Sure. We're all in the same boat. People who are watching us, if you have any money in the bank, your money is as safe as the future we hold. And Evergreen feels the same way. We don't know what's going to happen. Based on our experience from the past, our endowments are healthy, and we have done very well. And we have taken money from the growth, like you said before, to support part of our budget. Going into the future, we hope that it will be the same way. But sadly, you mentioned volatility, and there's volatility not only in the markets, but in many other aspects of our society right now. And all we can do is hope for the best and pray and do the best we can. And I'm very satisfied that we are doing the best we can right now.
I think we are. And you, as the budget review officer, are a regular part of our finance team meetings. We have a budget team that comes together every year to help design the budget that gets presented and voted on at our annual meetings. And our budgets are extremely transparent. There's nothing hidden. All of the balances are listed. Everything is out there for people to see. There's no hidden spending. And I know, because I write the checks. When we are talking about investments, though, there are some significant investments that Evergreen has made. And kind of notably, we've made a big investment in staff. We went from 2.25 full-time people to 3.5 full-time people, basically. You have Reverend Doug and Reverend Sam and myself, all as full-time people, and then Reverend Siobhan is on contract with us. And she is about quarter time right now. That is a big jump in spending. That investment was made because the executive committee really felt, and you've been part of the executive committee for a long time, maybe you can correct me if I'm out of touch here, but really felt that Evergreen's continued engagement with the churches was important. And not just in the ways that we'd done it before, but in new and I'll say unconventional ways too.
Yeah. Not only that, but we have grown in the number of churches, and we have grown in the distance that we are reaching. I mean, we have churches in Puerto Rico now. We have a church in Connecticut. We have churches in Colorado, everywhere else. So the traveling budget has increased. Now, it used to be at the beginning of Reverend Doug of Les Bernal's ministry with us, he was the only person traveling. Right. But now, like you said, with all this incorporated staff and the new responsibilities of this staff, you guys are traveling as well. Right. So our travel budget has grown. I think what we have seen in the last 6 years is Evergreen going to a new organizational level. Evergreen started as an association with about 30 churches, and it was handled, all the birth process was handled. The design of how we were going to make decisions, how we were going to be organized, how we were going to do things, writing a constitution for Evergreen, writing all the rules of procedure and all those things. And then Evergreen reached adolescence and early adulthood, and transitioned into becoming a settled organization. Not settled in our hopes and dreams, but settled in our organization.
Sure.
We started writing policy that is more fine-tuned. We have a personnel committee. Things like that. In Evergreen went to that level, organizational level. And that's where we are now. Yeah. And we did that intentionally. We did that with a lot of responsibility, thinking we want to be a serious organization. And that's why not only churches, but organizations, other nonprofits with religious kind of services are approaching us and saying, we want to be a part of who you are. Because they see not only our way of doing things, our design for doing things, but also our responsibility and the seriousness of what we do. So that new level we have entered with eyes wide open as an executive committee and executive minister and associate executive ministers. So that's where we are.
What are the ways that churches should be actually doing the giving? Like, do they just send checks? How do they, and where do they send them?
They should send checks to Evergreen. There is a remittance form that our denomination sends to the churches that are giving to United Missions. If that form is filled out and sent with a check to Evergreen, that helps your job a lot, because then you know that this is for United Missions, this is for Evergreen, you know how to discriminate the money. If they don't send a remittance form with their offering, then you send everything to United Missions. And of course, the church gets the 65%. But if the intention of the church is to send a portion to United Missions and a portion as a regional offering, they should write that down and let you know. So the answer is, churches send a check, they send the check to Evergreen, and they send a note, hopefully the remittance form, saying this much is for this and this much is for this other thing.
I highly encourage the remittance form. It's really, really easy to use, and it makes my job much easier. But sometimes churches will put stuff in the memos. This is all an America for Christ offering or something like that. And that's fine too. And if you don't have one of those remittance forms, just shoot me an email. I'll be glad to give it to you. To send a check to Evergreen, you're going to send that to P.O. Box 1044 in Kent, Washington, with a zip code of 98035-1044. And all checks should be made out to the Evergreen Association. One of the things that we have done as part of our transparency when we've been planning our budget is that the last couple of years we've intentionally presented and approved as a region a deficit budget. Mm-hmm. Could you explain a bit about why we have a deficit budget and what that means?
Yes. The deficit budgeted for this year to 2025 is of $67,000. We did that intentionally. The deficit comes from what we talked about before, which is the increase in personnel and also the traveling budget. The reason we leave the deficit there is because we need to have it in front of us. We need to have it as a challenge. We need to know that that's the goal. The goal is to overcome that deficit. Budgets, in my opinion, statements of faith.
Okay.
It's a faith budget that we say we're going to put together all this money and we're going to do all these things with this money. That's a budget. We don't have enough income now. But if we increase our giving, then we can meet that deficit. And that's why we left the deficit there, to keep it in front of people. If you, as an organization, if the organization does balanced budget and presents balanced budget, where you cut in the expenses and increase the giving to levels that probably will not happen, you're lying to yourself and you're lying to your constituents. And you're putting at ease your constituents. They're going to say, oh, we're doing so well, we're doing so well, we're doing so well. And then in the end, you will end up with a deficit that is unexpected. In this case, like you said, transparency. This is where we are. We know it from the beginning of the year, and we carry that through the year knowing that we have enough resources to meet it when push comes to shove. So we're not going to be auctioning our offices or anything like that.
Which is good because we rent. Right now, we just had another church join us, Grant Park Church in Portland, Oregon, which is excellent. That happens to be your home church, I know that, where you are the treasurer. You're a budget officer all the way up. One of the things that's true is that, you mentioned that Evergreen started with around 30 churches. We're now over 60. We've more than doubled in size. We've gone and with this transparent budget, well, the challenge that we offered at our annual meeting was for us to rise to that challenge. And we are rising to that challenge. We've seen an increase in giving, and we want to encourage our churches to continue that trend. And those individuals who give to us so faithfully, we're so grateful, and we want to encourage you as well. And those of you who maybe aren't giving, but could, we want to encourage that. We are so grateful for everyone who gives. I know that Doug sends out those personalized thank yous to our individual givers, and we take our time at the annual meeting to do that, to offer that thanks to our congregations. What would you say for a church that isn't giving to United Mission now or to Evergreen? What would you say that they could do or think about as they begin the process of looking at their budget, particularly for next year, toward giving?
Yes. We are the denomination of small churches. And in Evergreen, we have a lot of very small churches. You mentioned my church. My church is a very small church. We have about 15 people on Sundays in that sanctuary. To think of giving beyond the four walls of our church sometimes is overwhelming. We don't think we can, especially when some of our churches are running on deficit. I'm reminded of the parable of the 10 lepers, not from the point of view of the giving thanks, but from this point of view. Jesus said to them, go and show yourselves to the priest, because in those days they had to show themselves to the priest to be readmitted if they were healed. When they were full of leprosy, Jesus said, go and show yourselves to the priest. They could have said, Jesus, the priest is going to throw us away because we're still full of leprosy. Heal us first. But Jesus said, go and show yourself to the priest. And they went. And the scripture says, as they went, they were healed. So I would say to you, if your church has a deficit, if you don't see how you can give more, set a goal. Say, for example, next year we're going to give $50 a month to United Missions. Well, it's a drop in the bucket for the denomination, but for you, it's a step of faith. And as you go, your finances will be healed. Because when we give with grace, the grace of God superabounds. I believe that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being willing to both get into the theology, the grace of this all, and then also into the weeds of the numbers. And there's no one that we could have done that with but you. So thank you so much, Reverend Dr. DaValle. We are so grateful.
My pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
And thank you for watching Cultivate. We hope that you join us for future episodes. Sam will probably be back in this chair next time. All right. Bye, everybody.